film begins by showing Norwegian troops sent to maintain security in Narvik, a city vulnerable to invasion. During World War II, Norway decided to remain neutral and allowed both German and British forces to purchase iron ore in the city of Narvik, where this iron ore was used as a raw material to manufacture weapons of war. At that time, one of the soldiers sent was Gunnar, who was a local resident, as Narvik was his hometown. During a break, Gunnar asked for permission from his commander to visit his family. As a soldier, he rarely got to spend time with his family, so whenever there was a chance, Gunnar would definitely take advantage of it as best as he could. Fortunately, his commander granted him permission, and Gunnar quickly went to see his wife. However, his wife was still busy working, so Gunnar stopped by the hotel where his wife worked to inform her that he would be going home. Ingrid, who was Gunnar's wife, worked as a waitress and was also trusted as a translator because she mastered several languages, including English and German. On that day, there happened to be a meeting between the mayor of Narvik and representatives from the Nazis and the British to discuss the purchase of iron ore. At this meeting, Ingrid was asked to act as a translator for the Nazi official. After learning that her husband would be coming home, Ingrid looked very enthusiastic and promised to come home earlier so that their meeting could last longer. After that, Gunnar went home, which was right behind the hotel, and he was very happy to see his son, Ole, playing with his grandfather. Gunnar then gave a toy train to his son, which made Ole visibly happy. Although Gunnar was busy serving his country, Ole still received affection. On the other hand, Ingrid was still working. In the midst of her job, a British official approached her to inquire about her conversation with the Nazi official. As a person of integrity, Ingrid said that she was just a translator and had no right to reveal others' secrets, especially since this was related to the World War. In the evening, Ingrid returned home and immediately expressed her longing for Gunnar. Seeing this, Gunnar's father took Ole to sleep in the next room, so Gunnar and Ingrid could spend some time together. At midnight, Gunnar said goodbye to Ingrid again, as he had to return to his post. And it was a common occurrence for a soldier to sacrifice time with their family to defend their country's sovereignty. Upon leaving the house, Gunnar saw a fire blazing at the harbor, so he hurried to the scene of the fire. On the way, his commander informed him that Nazi soldiers had set fire to a British ship. Upon arriving at the harbor, Gunnar was shocked to see Norwegian and Nazi soldiers pointing guns at each other. Until then, Norway had been relatively safe, but somehow the situation had suddenly become tense. In this tense moment, the Norwegian military commander demanded an explanation from the Nazi commander about why they had attacked the British near Norwegian territory. It turned out that the conflict between Germany and Britain had escalated, leading them to attack various locations where British troops were present, including the city of Narvik. After hearing the explanation, the Norwegian commander ordered his men to return to the barracks. They decided not to retaliate for the attack and to maintain Norway's neutral stance. On the way back, some soldiers were seen fleeing, believing that the city of Narvik had fallen into Nazi hands. Therefore, those who hated Hitler did not want to serve under him. Seeing this, Gunnar tried to prevent his close friend from fleeing, as it was an act of cowardice. In the morning, the remaining Norwegian troops moved toward the city's border. Under the orders of the deputy commander, they were to secure certain areas along the border. Apparently, the Nazi soldiers had attempted to order them back to their base, but the Norwegian troops refused the command. Realizing they were outnumbered, the Nazi soldiers ultimately did not dare to stop the Norwegian soldiers. Elsewhere, Ingrid, who had just started working again, was approached by a British official. The man then asked Ingrid for help in opening access to the hotel through the back door. It turned out the man was assigned to pick up his superior at the hotel without being noticed by the Nazi forces. Meanwhile, a number of Nazi soldiers were conducting a cleansing operation, where they were tasked with capturing 2 British officials hiding in the hotel. Therefore, they decided to take over the hotel. Secretly, Ingrid helped the British officials escape. However, they were startled by the arrival of several Nazi soldiers. Despite this, Ingrid tried to distract them by offering them coffee. After that, Ingrid instructed the British officials to flee quietly. Additionally, Ingrid asked her co-worker to escort them to an empty cabin on the hill, where the 2 British officials could hide for a while. The reason Ingrid helped them was not because she sided with the British, but to prevent a major conflict from occurring in her country. Sometime later, after work, Ingrid informed her father-in-law that the Nazi soldiers had taken control of Narvik. Knowing this, he advised Ingrid to go to another town with her son, and he would follow later when the situation allowed. Without wasting any time, they went to the harbor to cross by boat. Unfortunately, the harbor was already closed by the Nazi soldiers, so they decided to take the train instead. On the other side, Gunnar and his comrades arrived at a bridge. Shortly afterward, the commander asked Gunnar about the location of the dynamite placed on the bridge. However, Gunnar was only a corporal and did not understand the strategy of dynamite placement. So, he contacted his father, who had just escorted Ingrid and Ole onto the train. At that moment, Gunnar asked about the location of the dynamite placed on the bridge, as his father had previously worked in the military and knew about the dynamite locations. Moreover, the dynamite had been placed there for a long time. Fortunately, his father knew the location of the dynamite, which was at the third pillar of the bridge. After learning this, his commander said that Norway was no longer neutral, so they had to launch a counterattack against the Nazis. First, his commander instructed Gunnar to detonate the dynamite to bring down the bridge. If the bridge was damaged, then trains could not pass over it. As a result, the Nazi forces would not be able to transport iron ore out of Narvik. However, before the mission could proceed, the Norwegian troops saw movement at the end of the bridge. Unexpectedly, they were Narvik residents who were forced down by the Nazi soldiers. Realizing this, the Norwegian soldiers immediately helped the civilians, and among them were Ingrid and Ole. At that moment, Gunnar met his wife and son at the wrong time and immediately instructed them to hide in a tunnel while he and his comrades continued the mission to blow up the bridge. After that, Gunnar climbed the bridge pillar his father had indicated and set up the dynamite fuse. At the same time, a Nazi soldier suddenly attacked, but Gunnar still managed to set up the fuse. And he instructed his comrade to ignite the fuse as quickly as possible. Although the dynamite was successfully detonated, the bridge remained standing firm, allowing the Nazi soldiers to defeat the Norwegian troops, including Gunnar. Sometime later, the Nazi soldiers found Ingrid and Ole hiding, and they were taken back to the city of Narvik. While crossing the bridge, Ingrid saw Gunnar being held captive by the enemy. Unfortunately, there was nothing she could do to save Gunnar. Upon reaching the city, Ingrid was met by her father-in-law. Additionally, Ingrid was asked by a Nazi officer to be a translator. Once inside the hotel, the mayor of Narvik protested to the Nazis for attacking the city of Narvik, despite Norway being a neutral country. Fortunately, with Ingrid's help, the Nazi officer explained that what the Nazis had done was to drive out the British. Additionally, the man also promised to protect the civilians from external attacks. However, the mayor of Narvik realized that the Nazis' reasoning was just a deception, so he refused to continue the discussion, believing that the words of the Nazis could not be trusted. After the conversation, Ingrid asked the Nazi official for help in freeing her husband, Gunnar. Hearing this, the man promised to help Gunnar because Ingrid had assisted him as a translator. The next morning, Ingrid's co-worker came to her house and conveyed a message from the British official requesting her to meet them while bringing a pack of cigarettes, as there was something important they wanted to discuss. Although she was afraid of being discovered by the Nazis, Ingrid still met with the British officials because her country and Britain were close allies, so they had to help each other. Upon arriving at the cabin, the British officials explained why they had summoned Ingrid. Apparently, they wanted Ingrid to become a spy and gather information about Nazi defense strategies. This information was crucial for the British military to drive the Germans out of Narvik. Although she was a bit hesitant, Ingrid agreed to the request. Upon returning to the hotel, Ingrid prepared to serve drinks to the Nazi officials. In the room, Ingrid saw a map of German defenses, but she had no opportunity to take it. Shortly afterward, the sound of missile fire was heard, and it turned out that British warships were attacking the port of Narvik. Realizing this, Ingrid hurried home and immediately took her son to hide in the basement. At the same time, other townspeople also rushed to take shelter in the basement. In the evening, Ingrid along with her son and her father-in-law could come out of the basement, after Hayes suspected that the battle was over. But to confirm it, they went to the hotel and saw many injured Nazi soldiers. Ingrid also overheard the German soldiers saying that the British warships had retreated. Moreover, due to this sudden attack, several German warships were destroyed and sunk. After that, Ingrid was instructed by her boss to help treat the wounded soldiers. Although her father-in-law forbade it, Ingrid had no other choice because she had to work professionally. Ingrid then went to the guest room to get some blankets to cover the injured soldiers. At the same time, she immediately took advantage of the opportunity to sneak into the Nazi officer's room with the intent to steal the Nazi defense map. Fortunately, Ingrid managed to steal the map, and she immediately went to the cabin on the hill. Upon arriving there, Ingrid handed the map over to the British officials, and they thanked Ingrid because, with the map, the British forces could identify the weaknesses in the Nazi defenses. After that, they promptly sent the information to the British military using a telegraph. Shortly after, Ingrid hurried home. But she was stopped by a Nazi soldier, as she was considered to be violating the curfew. Ingrid then explained that she was a hotel worker and showed her identification card. After inspecting her, the Nazi soldier found nothing suspicious about Ingrid and released her. As Ingrid walked toward her house, there was a sudden explosion at her home. Seeing her house in ruins, Ingrid rushed to find her son and father-in-law. Unfortunately, Ingrid's father-in-law had died as a result of the incident. For weeks passed, and the Nazi soldiers continued to strengthen their defenses in Narvik by digging trenches to avoid enemy fire. On the other hand, Gunnar and some of his fellow captives were forced to work, transporting weapons and ammunition to those trenches. However, due to exhaustion, one of the Norwegian soldiers fell. Seeing this, Gunnar immediately encouraged his comrade to get up again, and his efforts were successful. Upon arriving at the trench, Gunnar saw how cruel the Nazi soldiers were, where they deliberately starved the captives. There were even some Norwegian soldiers who were sick and left lying in the trench without any help. As Gunnar had not eaten for days, he secretly stole food from the Nazi soldiers. Not long after, gunfire was heard towards the trench, and the battle began. In the midst of the battle, some of the captives tried to escape. With Gunnar and the other captives did the same until they were eventually freed by the combined forces of Norway, Britain, and France. After that, Gunnar helped the Allied forces to wipe out the Nazi troops, and the battle within the trench was inevitable, but Gunnar stealthily shot enemy soldiers from behind. Sometime later, the combined forces managed to defeat the Nazi soldiers and take control of the trench. After that moment, Gunnar reunited with his commander, and the man was very happy because Gunnar was still alive. However, his commander brought bad news, saying that Gunnar's father had died due to a British missile strike. Hearing this, Gunnar was deeply devastated and regretful because he could not protect his own father. To make up for his failure, Gunnar vowed not to let this happen to his wife and son. Meanwhile, many townspeople were hiding in bunkers, fearing another attack. Ingrid was also there, changing the bandages on Ole after he had been injured when the missile hit their home. Shortly after, Ingrid's co-worker approached her, informing her that the Nazi official had requested her to go to the hotel immediately to act as a translator again. Knowing this, Ingrid hurried to the hotel, entrusting Ole to her co-worker. Upon arriving at the hotel, the mayor of Narvik was negotiating with the Nazi officials. At that moment, the German soldiers threatened not to provide food to the townspeople if the British official had not been found. Apparently, they accused someone of betraying them by providing information to the British. However, the mayor of Narvik said he knew nothing about it. At the same time, the German soldiers' threats made the mayor of Narvik angry, and he refused to continue the negotiations. As they were about to leave the room, a sudden follow-up attack occurred. Seeing this, Ingrid prepared to return to the bunker. But before leaving, the Nazi officer asked her to stay at the hotel because, it turned out, the officer secretly liked Ingrid. However, Ingrid declined the offer. Shortly afterward, Ingrid arrived at the bunker. Throughout the night, the sounds of gunfire and explosions continued. When Ingrid awakened by the noise, she decided to check on her son. Unexpectedly, Ole had a high fever, so Ingrid immediately took him to the hotel to be examined by a Nazi doctor. At that moment, Ingrid courageously went to the hotel amidst the tense war situation. Upon arriving at the hotel, Ingrid asked the Nazi officer for help so that her son could be examined by a doctor. She even said that she would reveal the hiding place of the British officials as long as Ole could be treated. Eventually, Ingrid and the Nazi officer reached an agreement, and she disclosed that the British were in an empty cabin on the hill. The Nazi soldiers then rushed to the location. After that, Ole was immediately treated by the Nazi doctor. On the other side, the Allied forces were preparing to attack the Nazis' last line of defense, as they planned to take over the enemy's cannon hidden in the tunnel on the hill. If this mission succeeded, they would reclaim the city of Narvik from the Germans. After that, the Allied forces advanced to the battle line. On the other side, the Nazi soldiers had prepared cannons and machine guns to fend off the attack. At the same time, gunfire continued from the enemy, causing the Norwegian soldiers to lose their nerve. Some even turned back and tried to flee the battlefield. Seeing this, the commander ordered his soldiers to return to the front lines, threatening to shoot them all if they acted like cowards. Because of this, the Norwegian soldiers returned to the battlefield. Meanwhile, Gunnar and two of his comrades searched for a safer route to the tunnel. After that, the three of them saw enemy soldiers firing at the Norwegian and Allied forces. Secretly, they neutralized the Nazi soldiers. Afterward, they managed to enter the tunnel. However, the Nazi soldiers operating the cannons spotted them, and eventually, both sides began exchanging fire. At the same time, the Allied forces were still engaged in a firefight with the enemy. But eventually, the Nazi troops were defeated. Shortly after, Gunnar came out to inform his commander that the enemy's cannon had been destroyed. Knowing this, the commander ordered his soldiers to lower the Nazi flag that was atop the hill. As the lowering of the flag signaled that the Nazi troops had been defeated. After a long battle that claimed many lives, the Norwegian soldiers regained control of the city of Narvik. On the other hand, the defeat in the Battle of Narvik was the first defeat for the Nazis during World War II. With this loss, the Nazi leaders decided to return to Germany. And they could no longer hold Narvik, so they had to leave before the Allied forces entered the city. At the hotel, the Nazi officer asked Ingrid to come with him to Germany because the man wanted Ingrid to start a new life with him. However, Ingrid declined the offer, as she was still married to Gunnar and remained faithful, waiting for his return. Upon hearing her refusal, the Nazi official informed Ingrid that Gunnar had died in battle. Hearing this, Ingrid was devastated, as she could not believe her husband was dead. Ingrid then went to her boss and expressed her sorrow. After that, her boss tried to encourage Ingrid to stay strong and carry on with life. Her boss also advised Ingrid to move to another town. Fearing that the people of Narvik would view her as a traitor after Ingrid was seen as being close to the enemy serving as a translator for the Nazi officer. After the German soldiers left, the residents of Narvik celebrated their victory. They also welcomed the Norwegian and Allied soldiers who had liberated Narvik from the tyranny of the Nazi forces. Amid the city's welcome, Gunnar did not see his wife, so he decided to go home. Fortunately, Ingrid and Ole were still in the house, searching for any remaining belongings. At that moment, Ingrid was very surprised to see that Gunnar was still alive. She felt grateful and happy that Gunnar had returned safely. After reuniting, Gunnar asked Ingrid why she didn't join in the celebration of the Norwegian soldiers' victory in the city streets. Hearing this, Ingrid explained that she was forbidden by the townspeople because they considered her an enemy for being close to the Nazi officer. However, Ingrid clarified that she was only a translator. Hearing this, Gunnar was truly disappointed as he couldn't understand why his wife had helped the enemy while Gunnar was fighting to defend their country. After that, Gunnar even began to see his wife as a traitor. However, Ingrid explained that she had no other choice and was forced to become a Nazi translator. After that, the couple ended up arguing, but while they were debating, Gunnar suddenly heard the sound of fighter jets. Unexpectedly, the Nazi forces were attacking Narvik to avenge their humiliating defeat. When the attack stopped, Gunnar saw a Norwegian soldier wounded by a missile launched by the enemy. Seeing this, Gunnar tried to help, but unfortunately, he was too late. Meanwhile, Ingrid took Ole to the harbor, planning to flee to another city without her husband. After Gunnar acted indifferently and let his wife leave just like that. Upon arriving at the harbor, many townspeople were already preparing to evacuate, as they feared that the Nazi forces would attack again. However, they were unhappy with Ingrid's presence and someone even pushed her, causing her suitcase to fall. While she was picking up her belongings, Ingrid was startled by Gunnar's arrival, having removed his uniform. At that moment, Gunnar had decided to accompany his wife and his son to evacuate to another city. After he finally realized that what Ingrid had done was merely a way to survive. In the end, Gunnar apologized to his wife and promised to always protect their small family, and the story came to an end. Moral lesson from the story: when you're stuck between Nazis and Brits, just make sure your coffee is strong enough to distract a few soldiers, because nothing says neutrality like serving drinks in a war zone.